I can start off. My name is Kathryn, and I'm sorry that I can't see all of you right now, so you'll have to bear with us for that. But I spent a semester in Dublin, Ireland, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm a senior here at UNC, and I want to be a teacher. And I really love traveling, so even on the weekends, I love to take like weekend trips to Boone and Knoxville and the beach and places like that.
Okay. Should I go? I'm Mollie. Okay.
Okay, hi, I'm Mollie. I'm a junior at UNC, and I'm a global studies major with a double in peace, war, and defense. And I'm interested in international diplomacy or possibly international law. And I enjoy singing and Irish dancing, and I love playing sports.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm a freshman at UNC. I'm majoring in economics, and definitely I enjoy everything that's related to it. So one of the things I'd like to do after studying here is to work on some sort of organization that promotes international development. And I am from Peru, so today I will talk about gender bias in my country. And I've also lived in Italy for the past 2 years and for 1 semester in Singapore.
And I'm going to be talking about Germany, and I lived there for 3 years.
So our kind of intro today is we want you to pair up with a partner and just talk about what you think gender bias is, and if you can think of any examples. And then after a couple minutes, we'll have a couple people come up and share.
You guys think gender bias is. So discuss that for a couple of seconds, and then they're going to come back and ask you. Yeah. Coming back together in 5, 4, 3, 2. Can we have someone share out to our guests what they feel gender bias is?
And if you want, you can feel free to come up to the camera.
Yeah. Sarah, call it to the camera. Come on, Sarah's going. Yeah. You can just like, yeah, you can stand where I am. Just take my seat.
Now do a Fortnite game.
So just say what
So gender bias is one gender over another.
Oh, we can't hear you very well. If you can come a little bit closer.
Louder, child.
Well, you prefer one gender over another.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other definitions or examples? That was good.
No.
Discrimination against a gender.
Yep. Awesome.
Anybody else have anything they want to share? No, Jesse?
No.
Jesse, okay.
Would you like to say?
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, the dictionary definition is pretty much what y'all said, that it's the unfair treatment of men and women solely because they are men and women. And so today we're going to jump in and talk about different ways that we see that within the countries that we're focusing on.
So Mollie, could you please keep the same slide so that I can go through my notes while the presentation is playing? Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm from Peru, so much of what I'm going to talk about comes from my personal experience, but I've also included some statistics and facts about my own country. So as you can see in the map, Peru has the coast, which is the yellow part of the map, then the mountains, which is the brownish part of the map, and then the jungle, which is the greenish part of the map. And women are affected differently depending on where they live. So I come from the coast, and I would say that that's where most women are considered part of the workforce. However, this changes if you go to the mountainous areas or the jungle. So first of all, the woman in the workforce is sort of new because it really started in the 90s when women increasingly entered the service industries to replace men. And they were hired because the employers believed that they could pay less to women and that they would not form unions. So during that period of time, they were not very much labor rights for women, and this has improved throughout the years up till today. Then next slide, please. So in some ways that we can see traditional assumptions related to the woman's role in society are the gender gap. So women would earn less than men, then early marriage and pregnancy, sexism in the media, stereotypes such as like women should work in the house and should take care of the kids, and then gender and domestic based violence. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay. Could I ask you, like the students, if anyone speaks Spanish?
Do we have anyone in here? Alejandro, do you speak Spanish?
No, I'm just some guy.
Or anyone that's taking Spanish at school?
Do you guys take Spanish in
Y
school?
no tenga español.
So yes, we do have students that aren't all of you in Spanish. All of you take Spanish? No,
No, no español.
I know it's in.
Yeah, I
Okay.
take español.
So some are taking Spanish and some are not. Currently, we don't have anyone in class that are Spanish speaking.
Okay. Yeah, not a problem because I'll translate what it says in the image. So this image basically talks about the disparity between women and men in the workforce and their presence in the public sector. So any work that is related to the government, for example. So for example, in this graph, we can see that in the public sector, 55% of the workers are men, while 45 are women. That's in the lower corner of the left side. Yeah, that corner there. And then in the private sector, this is much bigger. So men are 67% of the workforce, while women are only 33. And for example, in terms of the gender gap, the pay, women gain 32% less than men, and in the public sector is 15% less. So you can see that with these concrete numbers that the difference are quite significant, as well as, for example, in terms of the numbers of women that work in the public sector. Even though there's, in the middle, there's a graph where you can see the people, the men is bigger than the women. And there in 2004, 43% of the workforce was composed by women, and now it's 45. So even though it's been 9 years, the numbers are pretty much the same. So this reveals how we tackle those issues and if there's any change being really done in Peru in terms of like including women in the workforce. Okay. Then I will now talk about women in politics. So currently the Congress has the largest number of women legislators, which they're 36, and this is 27% of all the congressmen that are in the Congress right now, and this is quite big, I would suggest, as we saw that in the public sector, usually women are like less than men, less numbers. So this would be still less, because in the previous graph, we saw that only 40, can we go to the previous graph 1 second? So 45% of women work in the public sector. The Congress is one of the public sectors where women are employed. So, okay, next one. And here it's only 27. So even though it's a big number, it's still quite small for the woman representation in Congress. And then nowadays, there's also a quota for parties, and they have to include at least 30% of both sexes on their lists. So this is in a way like to promote women being part of politics and also for people to encourage them to vote for women candidates. Okay, next slide. So these are a few women that are part of politics. Our current vice president is a woman. Her name is Mercedes Arauz. Then we had the first woman to be elected as a mayor of Lima, which Lima is the capital city, and she was a mayor from 2011 to 2014. And until last year, our president of Congress was also a woman. Now, as I mentioned, the Congress is in the coastal area. So this is in this area of like Peru, women are treated differently, and there's more, I would say, more opportunities for women to be part of the workforce than in the rural areas. And this is because, to begin with, in the rural areas, there's not many opportunities, neither services provided. So for example, 33% of women are illiterate, whereas only 10% of men are. And this is much lower in urban areas. For example, instead of having 33% of women not being able to read nor write, this is only 7% in the capital city and surrounding areas. So another important aspect is that in Peru, even though our first language is Spanish, in the rural areas, it's not widely spoken. A lot of people do speak it, but there's many that don't. So these this also plays a role in the possibility of women of getting a job, because traditional like people do not learn in Spanish as their first language. So then when they want to go to some job, then it is required for them to know how to speak Spanish. And since they don't, then this automatically restricts their possibilities of, for example, gaining income. And then
Maria, can you tell them what languages they speak in the rural areas?
Yeah, so I'd like first to ask you if you could guess how many languages are spoken in Peru. Just any random guess.
In Peru. 5. 7. I have a 4, I have a 5, and I have a 7.
Okay, well, in reality, there's actually 47 indigenous languages spoken in the country. There's many that don't really have an alphabet, so they cannot be written, they're only spoken. However, this does demonstrate the wide variety and diversity within the country. And there's many communities that don't really live in big cities, so there's not much of a need to learn a universal language, let's say, because they just communicate within their communities. And this, in a way, it's negative because people like don't learn Spanish, and then therefore they cannot like communicate with the whole country. Nevertheless, there's also a benefit that it's related to the diversity present within the country and keeping like our local traditions. So just a final point on the rural women, it's that most of their work, if they do end up gaining, finding a job or like wanting to have an income, is related to farming or to taking care of any agricultural job. And then I found another statistic that in general, they earn 46% less than male workers. So also in the rural areas, there's this disparity in wage. Now, I'll briefly talk about a story of success. Oh, can we actually go one slide before? I didn't talk about this. Yeah. So this is a march that happened in 2016. There were 50,000 people involved, not just women, but men as well. And it was a march for justice, equality, and women's rights, because there was a case in which it was believed that women were not treated as equally when they were faced criminal charges. So then people marched in a collective call for justice, equal rights, and to end corruption and gender violence across the nation. So this was organized by the Assembly of Women and Diversities and the NGO, which is called Ni Una Menos in Spanish, which means not one more. And yeah, basically protesters were marching for gender rights. So we can see that even though there's gaps between the opportunities and the justice between both genders, people are still like deciding to call for justice and do something about it, which is something very positive. Okay, now I'll share the story of a Peruvian who is quite famous within our country. Since you can see in the bottom picture, she met with Barack Obama in a forum. As she basically created this NGO, which is called Laboratoria, and it's a social enterprise which tries to give women the resources to like become workers in technology. So find a job related to technology. And it has expanded. It started in Peru. However, now she has centers in Chile, Mexico, and Brazil. And she trains her and her team train women in order to become software developers. And usually these women are from underserved backgrounds. So gaining this access to like information regarding to like the development of softwares and the possibility of now having a job like really transforms their lives. So now we'll see a video of her in which she briefly explains what's she doing for women and creating like a more equal society.
And you can click the link below, Mollie, if you need to. Yeah. And did you want to start it at 1 minute 47, Maria?
Oh, finish it at 1:47.
I'll finish it. Okay. Oh, we don't have. Let me unmute. 1 second. All right, go ahead and try it, Mollie. Let's see if we have volume.
After I graduated SIPA, I wanted to move back to my home country, Peru, and start a company. And I ended up starting a web development company. It was through this experience of building this first company that really early on we realized it was very hard to find tech talent. There was so much demand. Startups, agencies, everyone was in need of developers, and there just weren't enough in Lima. We came up on a second problem, and that was the absolute lack of diversity in the sector. It took us over a year to find our first woman developer. And I realized that was the case not only in our company, but really in any other company doing technology across the world. So we said, okay, how can we tackle this market need and solve it by addressing a very pressing social problem? Laboratoria is a social enterprise training young women from underserved backgrounds to become software developers in Latin America. It's a very talented program. It's many hours, it's intense. They have a bunch of responsibilities at home that they need to handle while they study full time. Throughout the program, you see this transformation where they start believing that they can do it. And I think that's such a core part of enabling learning, you know, to really feel the confidence that there's nothing that you can't learn. The world is out there for you to go out and conquer it. And by the end of the program, our students are super empowered. They are advocates for women in tech. They are ready and confident to go out to their interviews and get their first jobs as developers. I knew that there's so much need in Peru and in Latin America that I somehow wanted to focus my career there, but I wasn't sure how.
Yes. So the main message that I wanted to give by showing this video is that, as she mentions, gender bias and gender, like the gap between the opportunities given to both, is something that she encountered and she thought she wanted to do something about. So that's what I would like to like now expand my presentation to, like giving the final message that if you encounter some sort of unequal like chances, or like that you think something is unfair, not just regarding gender, but like, for example, to different nationalities, that you like, if you feel you can do something, you do act upon it, because like small things can make the difference, such as this one. Okay, yeah, we can move.
Awesome. So now I'm going to move into gender bias in Ireland and how that looks, and how that looks different from Peru and from the US and Germany as well. So you can go to the next slide. The first thing I wanted to note too is just how small of a country Ireland is. This surprises most people, but North Carolina is actually about twice the size of Ireland. But despite it being such a small country, it actually ranked 8th out of 144 countries in the 2017 Global Gender Gap Report. And that is basically a report that tries to see how equitable gender is within these different countries. And the US actually ranked 49th out of 144. So Ireland seems to be doing a little bit better than the US, but there's still a lot of things that I was shocked that this was how they ranked, because there's still a lot of things, especially within politics and sports, that are just not equitable. And so just some basic facts are that men are paid 14% more than women, and that is a 2% increase. So it's growing instead of shrinking. And in 2016, a third of Irish women were employed in health and education sectors, while the majority of men were in construction, agriculture, and transport. And it's also interesting that 55% of women ages 25 to 35 have a third level degree, which is like a college or higher level master's degree, while men only have 43%. Yet women are still getting paid less than men, even though they have these higher degrees. And lastly, 98% of the people looking after the home in Ireland are women, which is huge. So you can go to the next one. Thank you. So here is just a picture of some of those statistics that I mentioned before. But one that I really wanted to focus on is the one I've circled in the middle about the Dáil Éireann, which is basically the House of Representatives. And the country is actually a majority women. There's more women than there are men, but only 22% of their representatives are women. You can go to the next one. So I wanted to give a little overview of the Irish political system before I went into the gender bias. It's a little bit different than ours. It's a parliamentary democracy, and the first language of Ireland is actually Irish. And so a lot of these names that you see here that are highlighted are in Irish, and they sound a lot different than they look. So I thought I would go through those. So they have a Taoiseach, who's basically the prime minister and just the head of the government. And they have a Tanaste, who is the deputy prime minister, followed by 15 government departments. And the secretaries of these make up what they call the cabinet, which is what I'm going to focus on today. And then their parliament is called the Oireachtas, and the Dáil Éireann is the House of Representatives, like I mentioned, who has 166 members. And the Sinead Éireann is the Senate, which has 60 members. And lastly, there's a president of Ireland who is the head of state, but he's still under the Taoiseach. You can move on. So in the past 100 years, in those cabinet level offices that I mentioned earlier, only 19 women have been appointed and served in those offices. And in the US, in the past 85 years, 36 women have served in those offices. And Obama alone appointed 8, and Bush appointed 6. So there's a big gap in the number of women who are serving in these high-level offices in this country that is a majority women. And it's interesting that the first female cabinet member was actually the second female in the world in official governments to be appointed to this level of office. And that was in 1919. And Ireland was second to Russia to appoint a woman to a cabinet level position. But then after being so progressive and being that second country in the world to do that, they didn't have another female cabinet member for 60 years as they went through a very conservative period in their politics and in their history. So yeah, you can move on. And then another way that I see, this is more of a personal experience too, of seeing gender bias in the world of sports is through the GAA, which is the Gaelic Athletic Association. And it's just like a really big deal in Ireland to play these Gaelic sports. And so those include things such as Gaelic football, which is kind of like a mix between rugby and handball, a sport called hurling, a sport called rounders, and handball itself. And there's a lot of pride that surrounds these sports, and every county has their own team, and it's just a big deal and a big thing to rally around to bring pride to Ireland. And at the end of the year, they have this big thing for hurling called the All-Ireland Final, which is kind of like the Super Bowl for us. But women for years have been kind of barred from the GAA, and they ended up making their own sport like hurling called camogie. And I have a little video here to show you what camogie is.
I am strong, powerful,
Skillful.
proud of who I am and the game that I play.
I'm an athlete.
This is our game.
This is your game.
They took away the prophet's dream for a prophet on the street. She's stronger than you know. Her heart of steel starts to grow. All his life he's been told. He'll be coming when he's old. All the keys and all the blows. He won't never show. As he's stronger than you know. Heart of steel starts to grow. You've been fighting for it all right. You've been flickering to me. It's like so superheroes. Every day, every hour, to the day, you've been fighting for it all right. You've been working every day. It's like so superheroes. Every day, every hour, to the day, you've been fighting.
Awesome, thank you. So that again was the game camogie, which is it's been made into the female version of the Irish game hurling, which, like I said, is a really big deal in Ireland, and they have an All-Ireland final every year. But as you can see, it's a pretty rough game. There's not a lot of equipment that's worn, like you can get hit with a stick, and with the hurley is what the stick is called. And for many years, it was seen as really too rough for women to participate in. And if you can go down to the next slide. Thank you. So like I said, there has been exclusion from sport for women in Ireland for a really long time. And the leader of the GAA recently came out and acknowledged this and said that he wants to help include more women in sport. And before we get going, if you play any sports, can you raise your hand for me? Anyone who plays sports? Yeah? Cool. So for the women, there's been different campaigns to try to get girls to be included, because there was a study that found that only 25% of women participate in sport, while 43% of men do. And there's been a couple campaigns called This Girl Can campaign and the Women in Sport Initiative, because they found that the reason that a lot of girls and women weren't participating was because of this fear that they were going to be judged and made fun of, because in Ireland there's a culture of sports are for men and women shouldn't be playing them. And so women's sports has become more popular because of these initiatives, but there's still a disconnect between how much they're paid and the level of sponsorship they get and the places that they can play, such as their big stadiums. And the pictures on the right, the bottom actually shows the Irish hockey team who won a silver medal in the last Olympics, and that was a big deal, and there's a lot of people who rallied around them. So yeah, that's all I had.
All right. So I'm presenting on Germany. So a little bit of an overview, like Kat said, for Ireland. Germany, it's ranked 12th out of 144 countries on last year's Global Gender Gap Report. There's a 21% unadjusted pay gap between men and women, so that's like overall. But then adjusted, so for working for like the same kind of work in the same job, there's a 6% adjusted pay gap still, even when they are doing the same exact job. And then actually this year, there's a wage transparency law that has been passed that's going to make it much more like it's more easily reportable, more visible if there is a pay gap, because a lot of times women who are working in a company might not even know that their male counterparts are being paid more than they are. So this is going to help with that. On a positive, Germany has really, really great maternity and paternity leave. So in the 6 weeks before having a baby and the 8 weeks after having a baby, the woman is fully paid her normal pay for her work for working her job, and then up to 12 months after that, she gets 65% of her paycheck. And for the paternity leave, the man after the baby is born also gets up to 12 weeks of fully paid paycheck, which is really great, especially compared to the US. Something that's interesting about the German language actually itself is how gendered it is. So, for example, in English, we refer to the teacher as just the teacher. But in German, there's actually a difference if it's a male or a female teacher. So male teacher is der Lehrer, and then a female teacher is die Lehrerin. And oftentimes in like job openings or like in advertising or just in daily language, the default is to refer to that position in the male form. So it can be hard for like women to even imagine themselves like in those roles when it's always constantly referred to in the male form. So there has been some movement and a couple of protests, but it's been kind of a slow movement in Germany. And this is a picture of one of those protests here. So it says fingers off, so like hands off right there, finger wag, and then we are not fair game is wir sind kein Freiwild. And then there's also been a really interesting debate in Germany. Have you guys heard of the like refugee crisis at all, or are familiar with that, like in happening kind of like Western Europe? There's been an influx of immigrants into Western Europe, and there's been this debate of like allowing burqas or not, which is the like full veil coverage of women. And this is a real advertisement from, it's called Alternative for Germany. It's a very far right group, and it says burqas will stick with bikinis. And then this one is really like playing on emotional and political sides, saying like the freedom of women is not like debatable. So that's been interesting. They actually did pass a ban on the full veil and also on the one that like just shows eyes, but they did not ban the hijab, so like just the head veil that shows the face. But that's been also, it's actually been like split on the left side as well for that. So the leader of Germany is called the Chancellor instead of the president, but it's actually a woman. Her name is Angela Merkel. She's the leader of the Christian Democratic Party. She is also the de facto leader of the European Union. She is known as the most powerful woman in the world currently, but it's very interesting that she's actually deliberately unshowy, and she doesn't even claim to be a feminist, and she really downplays her gender as being important. She's really known for her like very tidily kept hair and very, very predictable wardrobe as well, so that it's not even like commented on in the press, because she doesn't want her being a woman like focused on, which is really interesting and really kind of contrasts with Hillary Clinton's campaign in the US. So these are some quotes about her leadership. So a woman that worked with her said, Ms. Merkel's leadership was often invisible because she painstakingly built consensus behind the scenes and avoided claiming credit for ideas she often originated. And then another woman who actually worked under Hillary Clinton in government was the subtle path to power as the sure one for women is still very much the case. I wish it weren't, but it is. So that's like a very interesting take on like rising to power without situating herself as like a threat to the men who are already in power, which seems to be like an unfortunate reality. But Angela Merkel has been in the chancellorship for the past 13 years. So I think things have definitely been changing within those 13 years. Some historical roots of just women in general in Germany come post World War II with the Trümmerfrau. So this translates to rebel women. And this is still today like memorialized with statues all throughout Germany. And it portrays this image of these smiling women who like volunteered to clean up rubble after the war and were like very happy to help. But it's a little bit of a myth, because in reality, like this was kind of the only thing that these women could do to make money, like after the war, when all the men did come back. So that's a little bit like debated, but it still like promotes this image of the very like ready to help woman. So then I also want to talk about LGBTQ in Germany. Berlin, which is the capital, is known as one of the most gay-friendly cities in the entire world. So this is a little bit of a timeline. You'll notice in 2000, they have like open service in the military, which differs from the US. Now it is, but the US used to have a policy of like, don't ask, don't tell, if you've ever heard of that. And then in 2017, so just last year, they legalized gay marriage. And pending for next year is legalization of adoption for same-sex parents, because right now they can only adopt their stepchildren. So these are some highlights from that as well. So the Treaty of Amsterdam was in 2006, and that was by the entire European Union. And it's an initiative that guarantees all people the same rights under the law, so housing, employment, etc. And then in a poll in 2013, so a little bit old, but in the US, 60% of people polled thought that society should accept homosexuality as normal. And in Germany, 87% thought that society should accept homosexuality as normal. And then bouncing off of the Me Too campaign in the US, Germany created a Me Queer campaign with people just expressing like the discrimination that they've experienced as LGBTQ. I wanted to share this video. So this is when the vote to legalize same-sex marriage was occurring. And these are Angela Merkel's comments on it. So again, she's part of the Christian Democrat Party, so politics are a little bit like different in Europe than the US, so it's kind of a mix of like socially liberal and conservative.
Für mich ist die Ehe im Grundgesetz die Ehe von Mann und Frau. Und deshalb habe ich heute auch diesem Gesetzentwurf nicht zugestimmt. Und deshalb hoffe ich, dass mit der Abstimmung heute nicht nur der gegenseitige Respekt zwischen den unterschiedlichen Positionen da ist, sondern dass damit auch ein Stück gesellschaftlicher Friede und Zusammenhalt geschaffen werden konnte.
So, yeah, she actually voted against it. And her party was split pretty much 50-50, but then they have a coalition government. And so the Social Democratic Party voted, I believe, 100% for it. And then the Green Party, which is focused on the environment, also voted for it. So it did pass. Yeah.
Now we'll move towards the assessment. So now that we've heard how gender bias is in Peru and Ireland and in Germany, we'll ask you some questions, and you'll need to say where do you think it happens. So for example, the first one is, a majority of girls decide not to play sports because of fear they will be ridiculed, not measure up to the cultural expectations. Okay, can one of you read the other one so that they don't like assume because I read it like it's my country?
So every day, 4 teenagers who are under the age of 15 years old become pregnant. Where does it happen?
Everywhere.
Where? Germany?
It happens everywhere.
How many of you say Germany?
I say Germany.
How many of you say Ireland?
Everywhere.
I say Germany.
Okay. This is actually in Peru. So I didn't mention it specifically, but it was based on on like a general information that I gave from the graph. Okay, next.
Obviously, Germany. Germany. They're saying Germany.
Correct.
So where does this happen? Where more than 50,000 people marched in 9 cities to protest violence against women and what they say is the indifference in the judicial system. Peru.
Yes. Correct. Yep.
And then finally, the capital of this country is known as one of the most gay-friendly cities in the world. Oh, there's one more. Yeah.
Correct.
Ireland.
Yep, very underrepresented in politics.
So I'm not sure we have enough time to discuss in pairs, or should we move to the conclusion?
I think we're okay. You guys finished at 2:25?
2:20.
2:20?
Okay.
All right, yeah, we can have a quick couple-minute discussion.
Okay, yeah, so with the people that are sitting around you, could you compare and contrast gender bias in the US and any of the focus countries that we have spoken about? So what are the main difference or similarities that you have encountered?
Similarities and differences, 30 seconds, go. You need to know where it is because they can't see you. Who wants to share? Go ahead, Terrence.
Aaron.
I thought you raised your hand. Who wants to share? Jesse.
No, I don't.
Go ahead, Joanne.
You raised your hand.
Can you stand so they can see you?
Yep, just stand. Just come over here. Come right here. Right here. Look at the camera.
Got it.
They can see you.
We can see you.
They can't hear you.
Talk louder. Louder.
We can't hear you. I don't know if it's the connection, but.
She's not talking. You're doing great, man.
In 2013, 87% voters. It was 87% in 16 US.
I know. What did you say?
Right. Thank you for saying something. We couldn't really hear you. I don't know if you want to type it in the chat or if your teacher can repeat it.
Okay.
Talking about the vote against gay rights.
Okay. The difference in the US. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I think that's it.
Okay.
So I think we kind of like did a review with that assessment. So I wanted to compare and contrast the US and these countries a little bit. So did you guys hear anything about Serena Williams at the US Open? Or does anyone know? Yeah?
Yeah.
So let's watch this video and a little background. So she's a tennis player and kind of like summary, she got a point docked by the ref. The ref punished her for supposedly talking to her coach or like interacting with her coach and then smashing a racket And then she was upset that she got docked the point because he insinuated that she was cheating. And she called the referee a thief, and he docked her another point. And so this is her response to that. Maybe. Oh, we're gonna have another.
Shop 30 styles of flannel at LLB.
I've seen other men call other umpires several things, and I'm here fighting for women's rights and for women's equality and for all kinds of stuff. And for me to say thief and for him to take a game, it made me feel like it was a sexist remark. I mean, like, how he's never took a game from a man because they said thief. For me, it blows my mind. But I'm going to continue to fight for women and to fight for us to have equal, like Courtney should be able to take her shirt off without getting a fine. Like, this is outrageous, you know? And I just feel like the fact that I have to go through this is just an example for the next person that has emotions and that want to express themselves and they want to be a strong woman. And they're going to be allowed to do that because of today. Maybe it didn't work out for me, but it's going to work out for the next person.
Yeah. So that was her response to that. So for you guys, if you could think about, like, do you think that Serena Williams' actions would be viewed differently by citizens of Ireland, Peru, or Germany, or differently in a different country? Or if the referee had been from a different cultural background? Like, what do you think about that?
It's hard to know. I need a few students in the main office. If I could get Rayshawn Treadwell, belonging.
So I think we're gonna have to actually wrap up. You're doing announcements. We're not gonna be able to hear you guys anymore.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, then we'll just wrap up with trying to think about how gender bias maybe affects your personal life or like people you know in your life.
Yeah, just some questions to think about the rest of the day or as you leave the presentation.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you so much, you guys. And I hope that you learned something.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.